Hello and good morning, guys. This is the first online lecture that I have prepared for you, and it's on the subject of market segmentation. We have heard that market segmentation is the process by which homogeneous groups of consumers are being formed who reacts to marketing stimuli in a similar way. Thereby, as you know, market segmentation is a market research discipline. Explicitly, if one can answer, a descriptive research design, and its process follows the research process as we have heard in the previous lessons. Thereby, the research design is mostly descriptive in order to yield the benefits from it. When segmenting markets and forming homogeneous groups of consumers, the challenge in market segmentation is to find the appropriate segmentation base, that is, the variable you start out with. As a segmentation base, we define the independent, not the dependent, the independent or passive variable introduced into the analytical process. Thereby, as mentioned before, this variable must have enough segmentation power to group respondents into those homogeneous groups as outlined above. And on the following slides, we will see a few applications or variables that suit themselves well for market segmentation in tourism. After you have formed segments and you need to evaluate whether the independent variable or passive variable has enough segmentation power, you can check that by using the following three criteria. The first criteria is the measurability, that is, definition of the segment in usable terms. Does the variable allow us to do that? And is it practical in a certain way? Because you need to recognize the customer when he shows up at the front desk or at the travel agent and define whether or not this customer now will suit the segment that you have chosen. It should be substantial. Of course, we will only go for segments that are large enough and profitable enough to pay off for the effort. And last but not least, we would like market segments to be accessible in order to promote them and obtain distribution accordingly. Let us now look into the various options of segmentation bases that we have available. The first one I would like to introduce you to is the demographic segmentation. The demographic segmentation is quite easy because it works on patterns that have been used over and over again. It is considered in terms of the above mentioned segmentation criteria a potential for tourism, and the social demographics or demographics outlined here on these slides are good aspects or good suggestions for the variable that you should use in order to form the segments. First of all, there is geography. Geography is being used, as I'm saying, as a proxy variable for a variety of demographic things such as culture and socioeconomic characteristics, which render the behavior of customers. As you well know, by geography, we do not only know where the customer comes from, we might also refer to the nationality of the customer, and with it have the entire cultural background, which we then cater to in our organizations. Just think of that Americans like ice water on the table, or Italians love to eat a lot of white bread for dining. So those would be, for example, or would be some examples by which geographical variables are useful. Another one is the age, especially in the view of a graying population and the so-called demographic shift. Age, as I'm saying here, is a crucial part of the definition of markets, and it's particularly important for developing linkages with media usage in order to promote tourism destinations. At certain ages, you will prefer certain destinations or holidays. This is why age plays such an important role. Another aspect of demographic segmentation is the family size. For general tourism, the most common distinction is made concerning family size, relates to whether children are present or not. In the accommodation sector, family size is often critically linked to pricing structures as well. When we talk about family size, we talk first of all whether there's kids or there is no kids, and if there are kids, we would like to make a distinction between above 14-year-olds and below 14-year-olds, or some sort of age range, which the pricing structure then relates to. Family life cycle is also a very useful concept. It's more complex than the three fundamental variables outlined above, but for vacation and leisure expenditure, it is interesting. Thereby, we could distinguish between four phases where the tourist behavior is different. First of all, we have the bachelor phase. Secondly, the newly married phase, then the full nest, which is couples with kids, and finally, it's the empty nest when the kids have flown out, quote unquote, and the parents are left behind on their own with some money, with time. So the empty nest is also considered as one of the most profitable segments in tourism. The second aspect of segmentation, or the second group of variables, are so-called psychographic segmentation variables. They focus on product attributes which consumers perceive to have goal-satisfying capabilities, usually employing the so-called psychographic variables. Within the psychographic variables, and I will be showing you a couple of examples, are lifestyles. As the market is becoming ever more consumer-orientated, changes in consumers' lifestyles are carefully followed and their impact on buying habits is monitored. Commercially developed segmentation schemes from various companies, there is no, I need to say, there is no scientific backup of it, but segmentation schemes by various organizations include a combination of variables which had been widely applied in the consumer sector. One needs to be careful, however, with lifestyles, simply because the lifestyle that you normally need in your everyday life is different from what you do on a holiday. Let me just show you a lifestyle segmentation as an example, which is one of the most well-known segmentation schemes, which is called the Sinus Milieus, which is lifestyle research. Here, we distinguish on one hand between, on the y-axis, we talk about social class. Here you have the upper social class, the middle social class, and the bottom social class. And in the x-dimension, we talk about the value orientation of customers, such as traditional values, modernizers, or scouts who look for a new orientation in their life. By combining those two dimensions, we can see within the matrix that various segments can be developed based on lifestyle research, such as the traditionals, such as the conservatives, such as the established, such as the mid market of the society, post-material, and so on and so forth. That is just an example of how segments are formed based on lifestyles. Now, we need to ask ourselves how relevant or how good are those segmentation criteria, and then we take a bit more than our few criteria that we have mentioned below. Relevance for buying behavior is low, as sinus milieus cannot describe holiday buying behavior, as holiday buying behavior seems always to be different from the regular buying behavior. Relevance for marketing instrument is average. It could be a good predictor for distribution and communication, but it is a bad predictor for product and price. The measurability can also be considered as low, as mentioned before. Your customers showing up at your organization cannot be identified as a part of a certain sinus groups, because you can't run a questionnaire with them before they check in. So the accessibility is very high. We know exactly where those segments live, which is called geomarketing, and therefore we can target them perfectly. Stability of the segment over time is average, as sinus milieus move or are dynamic, as I used to say, and they change over time. Economy, average, as segments are well researched with regards to consumer goods. So lifestyle segmentation is a valuable way of segmenting tourists, but not necessarily the best one. The second one is social class. The underlying theory of social class is to combine the understanding of the everyday life of customers in different local cultures with information about their behavior and attitude towards products. Well, with social classes, we have different social classes on different continents or even countries. In Austria, we have social classes from A to F, where A is the highest social class and F is the lowest social class, and therefore based on income, based on gender, based on highest education, and finally based on occupation, social classes with those four variables are formed. Again, here it is difficult to detect a person's social class. You wouldn't even know yours when the customer shows up. So similar as to lifestyles, social classes are one way of segmenting market, but most probably not the best as far as tourists is concerned. Attitudes, we can form segments based on attitudes or preferences or benefits sought, which gives us an idea of how consumers perceive the offering, which is an important factor, especially in market communications. Also here I have prepared an example for attitude segmentation, namely a segmentation based on preferences or, as we call it, benefits sought. What you see here is a market research project where we interviewed 600 Viennese on their preferred resort hotel in alpine regions. Thereby, the respondents had to choose which category they prefer, which food and beverage arrangement they prefer in a hotel, which size of a hotel they prefer, and finally, which location. And by analyzing those markets, we came up that there is about 5 preferred hotel types for the Viennese that they would choose, and above there you see the percentage, that is how big the segment is. When we start out with the deluxe hotel as outlined here, we see that 16% of the Viennese would choose the deluxe hotel as their preferred hotel. You can see that clear on the highlighted numbers. Those numbers are value attributions or benefit attributions, and the highlighted number is what sticks out here. You can clearly see luxurious and first class is important to those Viennese, whereby the rest of the variables are less important. Then we have a very large segment, 37% of economy hotel. We call it the economy hotel simply because the focus here is on first class, on economy, whereby in the first group it's on luxurious and first class. So there's the same figures as far as first class is concerned, but there's a clear preference for economy, whereby the rest of the benefit values are below, are low, and therefore have no influence. 10% of the customers like the bed and breakfast hotels, whereby the category is of no importance, but the food and beverage category is, with a clear preference for bed and breakfast, where again all the other benefit values score relatively low. With 21% of all Viennese, the country house is also a pretty interesting segment, thereby focusing on small to mid-sized hotels, for sure under 100 rooms, and a hideaway location where it's quiet up in the mountains and really good to make a holiday. 21% of the Viennese would prefer this type of a hotel. And last but not least, we have a cosmopolitan hotel. This is the international type of hotel, where the preference is certainly on centrally located hotels or even decentrally hotels, but never a hideaway, in all the other benefit values, as you see, score low. Now, the benefit sought or the preference segmentation has relevance for buying behavior, as specific preferences are being expressed. Relevance for marketing instruments is also high as far as product and price are concerned, and middle to low as far as distribution and communication is concerned. Measurability is good by the hotel that those customers choose, and therefore it can be segmented easily. Customers can only be identified by the hotels they choose. How accessible are the market segments? Overall, middle to low, as customers cannot easily be identified in the market. So that's a drawback of the benefit sought segmentation. The stability over time is relatively high, as the preferences don't change as dynamic, and economy is also high, as customers kind of express their benefit sought. So the attitude segmentation is quite a good solution for the tourism industry. Motives, a strong impact of motivations on behavior and satisfaction is recognized. You know that already because we've discussed this in the course of consumer. With motives, customers do not only express what is important to them, but they also set the goals and expectations, which is then fed back as a mean of or a degree of satisfaction. Let me look at a motive segmentation, which we did for the city of Budapest some years ago. So we went out and we've interviewed 2,500 people in Budapest on what is important to them, and you can clearly see that here we have the average city tourist who does a city package. 33% of the tourists would belong to this segment. Then we have a recreation pole. You should know that Budapest is also a spa city, so some tourists go there to enjoy the recreational side. Here we have with 7% the recreational tourist and with 10% the hedonist. Then we have the learning or the experience pole. There we have visits of friends and relatives and the explorer with 17 versus 14%. And finally, we have the happening pole where event tourists and party tourists and flexible tourists can be aligned to. So this is a pretty nice motivational segmentation, and the relevance for buying behavior as outlined is pretty high, as motives define expectations and aspirations for a holiday. The relevance for marketing instrument, that is the 4 Ps, is considered average. The relevance is high for product and communication mix, but low for distribution and price. The measurability, overall middle to low, as customers cannot clearly be identified unless you question them, which is useless. But assumptions on their motives can be made based on their holiday activities that they choose or that they have chosen. Accessibility is considered average to high. As specific distribution channels exist for each one of those segments, so people can be reached. The stability over time is also relatively high, such as the economy in order to preempt such a segment. It depends obviously on the size of the segment whether or not this would work. So those are psychographic segmentation variables that you could use and that I could recommend without the problems that we have with it. A second or a third group that is really popular with practitioners is behavioral segmentation, as the practitioners think this is the best point for them. When we go into city hotels, we very often see occasional segmentation where hotels segment whether the customer shows up because of a business occasion, of a private occasion, or of a special occasion, right? The second group is benefits thought, which I have already introduced to you, and thereby come about with preferences, images, and attitudes. The third option, which is very often used, is the user status. Is it a non-user, a potential user, a first-time, a regular, or a former user? And last but not least, the user rate, whether it is a light, a medium, and a heavy user. You can forget those other two mentions because they just repeat what I have said before. So behavioral segmentation seems to be a rather interesting and as far as my experience goes, the most well-used form of segmentation in the tourism industry. As I said, the art of building segments, first of all, is to find the base, the variable that has enough power to form a segment, and by the criteria that I've introduced, measurability, accessibility, and so on, we can find out, or we can decide which variable we will use for our organization. Once the segments have been built and have been selected, we need a description of the segment, which we call profiling or developing a persona. What kind of things should such a profiling include? Well, Here are the things that make sense. Motivation, why are those people traveling and what are their expectations and goals? The travel experience, are they experienced travelers or are they less experienced travelers? And how often did they have a holiday in the past 2 years, and when, and what time of the year, and where did they go, and for how long did they stay? So there's a lot of questions that you can find out what the travel experience of a customer is. Information search behavior, where do the customers look for information and when, how long before they start out for a holiday. The booking behavior, same as the information search, where do they book, when do they book, how long in advance, and so on and so forth. Very interesting is the consumption behavior that should be described. What kind of accommodations did they use, and if they used a hotel, what kind of category did they prefer? How much money did they spend on food and beverage or other holiday activities, and what did they do specifically? So by monitoring or observing the consumption behavior of our tourists, we could get some insight into their holiday behavior. Of course, post-consumption behavior is also important because if we measure satisfaction, and you should know what satisfaction is, we look at the motivation, at the expectations, and if the expectations have been met or exceeded, the customer is satisfied. And then we ask customers whether they would want to come back or not. And also this information is very interesting. And last but not least, a segment profile should also contain demographic and socioeconomics, as discussed before, age, family size, family life cycle, occupation, income, etc. So those are questions that need to be part of the questionnaire. And when you have developed a segment and chosen a base, you then develop a very nice profile of this segment. This is about an A4 page or maybe 2 pages where to describe your customer and what your customer is all about.